Sergio Perez is one of the drivers who will enter the 2024 season with the biggest burden on his shoulders, and it seems like the pressure has been emphasised to a greater extent after the latest reports from the F1 world. And as if that weren't enough, the Mexican's 2024 seat could also be in jeopardy, and Red Bull would very likely get rid of his contract if the performance doesn't add up. And the top candidate for his replacement has been tipped to take his spot in a swift move. If this turns out to be the truth, Perez is very likely looking at the end of his F1 career. So with everything at stake, are we currently seeing the last of Checo? It goes without saying that Perez's underperformance in 2023 has hurt him greatly, especially in the period after the Miami GP. Having 5 consecutive weekends in which Perez didn't reach Q3 and only climbed on the podium once in Austria speaks volumes about where the priorities lay with the Austrian team. Obviously, battling for the P2 position until the last couple of races of the season didn't help as well, considering that his teammate has wrapped up the championship very early in the season and has dominated the entire grid to the point of single-handedly having more points than the second team in the Constructors' Championship, Mercedes. All of this has put a lot of pressure on Perez for the 2024 season, one that his team was adamant they would be supportive through, but one in which they did not deny they are looking for all their options on the table. Up until now, the general belief was that Red Bull would pay their respects to Perez and to the contract they signed a couple of years ago, but once 2025 comes, there will be no place for him and he'll have to look for a new home. The story has taken a very interesting twist once Horner said that Perez's destiny is in his own hands, and if we are to judge by proximate history, Perez was quite inconsistent throughout the beginning of the season. The only reason that he was able to keep the second spot in the Drivers' Championship was because the rest of the grid was as volatile as he was. So with Red Bull's rivals being much more compacted and competitive up front in 2024, according to their statements and the general expectations, is Perez in danger of losing his seat as early as in the middle of 2024? This is something that the renowned F1 journalist Lawrence Barretto has talked about, emphasising how important it would be for Red Bull to have 2 very strong drivers up front to secure the championships as early as possible. If you're in Red Bull's shoes, you would definitely want to continue the dominance that you accomplished in 2023, winning 21 out of their 22 venues, and 19 of those came Verstappen's way. Still, the Red Bull rivals have learned their ways of how to make competitive cars, and while we're yet to see what the RB20 is capable of, as the team tipped it to be an evolution of the 2023's version of the Red Bull's car, there is no doubt the grid will be a lot more compacted at the front. Barretto's belief is that Perez is going to be under a huge threat if he doesn't perform straight off the bat in 2024, and Ricciardo is right there to take his spot. So when talking about this, he went on to say, as it stands, it is believed Ricciardo tops senior management's list of suitable replacements. The Austrian will need to get back to his very best this year, and with many insiders feeling his AlphaTauri team will make a big step forward this year in terms of competitiveness, there's a strong chance he'll deliver. That'll give Red Bull a good kind of headache, as a 2018 spec Ricciardo might be too strong an option to turn down. Ricciardo's test in Silverstone seemed to be the real deal, and quite obviously his impact in AlphaTauri is not something you could neglect all of a sudden. Yes, the team did borrow as many parts as they could from the RB19 in the upgrades brought in Singapore and Abu Dhabi, but had it not been for Ricciardo's output in the Italian squad, then it's safe to assume that this is going to be a very good and challenging season for the Aussie as well, given the fact that he would also have to prove to the world that he has it in himself to be Verstappen's teammate. Red Bull, for one, is not short of options, but one thing they're very tired of is trying out drivers and building up up a championship-winning spirit in them, as we saw that not everyone is made out of the clothes of being Verstappen's teammate, including Ricciardo. The Aussie did fall back from Red Bull when he saw that the bigger attention was focused on his teammate, but once he realised the moves he made in his career didn't meet the expectations he had in mind, being the second driver on the most dominant team on the grid is definitely the dream scenario of retirement that Ricciardo could have in his head. We must not forget that AlphaTauri was dead last before Ricciardo replaced De Vries, and after some solid performances in the second half of the season, such as in Mexico, he helped the team finish 8th and grab around $20 million in extra prize money, which for a small team like AlphaTauri means quite a lot. Keep in mind that Ricciardo only drove on 7 circuits in the 2023 season and broke his wrist in Zandvoort, which enabled Lawson to have 5 very good races in which he scored 2 points in Singapore. The craziest part of this entire story is that Ricciardo's return to F1 was more or less blocked by Red Bull prior to the Silverstone test, and this is something that AlphaTauri's CEO Peter Bayer has elaborated on in a further matter. When talking about the potential replacement of De Vries and how the talks went down with Red Bull, as well as Ricciardo's importance for the Italian squad, Bayer went on to say, "Daniel has experience, so he helps us with the setup on all the routes. Daniel is a real reference for Yuki. He brought an incredible amount of new energy to the team within a week. Our mechanics were happy. Hey, wow, something is happening. The transition wasn't easy, but at the end of the day, it had such a positive impact." Originally, it was no, Daniel is a reserve driver at Red Bull and it stays that way. And then over the course of a month, we actually kept asking how things were going. At some point, Christian Horner came to us and said, "We're doing the test at Silverstone, maybe we'll take a look at it." Then Helmut said, "Yes, why not?" There is a huge mission that Ricciardo has to fulfill in AlphaTauri before he can move to Red Bull, and that is to raise the value of the team by actually competing at the highest level he can. Now that AlphaTauri has been following their own path of development, it's safe to assume that Ricciardo would be much more competitive alongside Yuki Tsunoda, but the entire F1 world knows that his mission is not to compete for scrap points or in the midfield. He wants to fight for podiums and occasionally for race wins when the opportunity arises. Even Ricciardo himself said that the dream scenario would be to retire from Red Bull whenever that would be possible, and right now the first opportunity seems to be in the middle of the 2024 season. If Perez doesn't manage to get out of the troublesome form he has in qualifying, as well as put the second place in the Drivers' Championship in jeopardy, then he would be doing nothing more than a favour for Ricciardo, who would then open a vacant seat in the Italian squad. This vacant seat is very likely to be filled by Lawson, who had an extraordinary 5-race debut in which he managed to even outscore and outperform Yuki Tsunoda, something that rang the alarm bell in the Japanese driver's mindset and forced him to be a better version of himself. But with not many teams offering suitable seats for Perez in 2025, even though we're about to experience the biggest silly season in quite some time, this could very well mean that Perez will be forced out of the sport, or would have to take a vacant year until a spot opens up in some of the rival teams of Red Bull. However, going from the most dominant team on the grid into a lower bracket team that is barely fighting for points is not the smoothest transition you could plan for yourself. So with this in mind, do you think that Perez's career is over if he doesn't prolong his contract with Red Bull? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.